Hey, welcome back to the last installment of how to be a peacemaker, what that looks like. And if you are just catching up with us, I'm going to encourage you, check the link in the description. I'm going to put the links there for you to go back and see the other episodes that I have done to help build the foundation of what it really means to be a peacemaker in this day and age and what that means to be a peacemaker as a Christian specifically. But today we're going to be talking about the last portion of being a peacemaker, which is grace. And grace is a very misunderstood idea that we're going to cover today. We're going to go through what does grace actually mean and how does that apply in the realm of being a peacemaker. But before we begin, my name's Mariah. I'm so glad that you decided to join me here today. Be sure to click that like button, subscribe if you have not subscribed yet, and ring the notification bell because I don't want you to miss a single episode. We have a lot of ground to cover. There's so many things to talk about that can be applied in how to grow in our emotional and spiritual maturity through biblically based holistic practices. And so I don't want you to miss out on any of that. Be sure to give this channel a follow so that way you are able to stay updated on information. You can also follow me over on my email list. If you go into the description, there is going to be a free guide for you. This is a guide to help you grow in emotional maturity, and it's free, so you don't want to miss out on that. You get that, and then you sign up for my email list, and my email people know that you get this information ahead of time, so you're going to be getting it before I record any of this information. And I have some fun special offers coming through my emails. I don't want you to miss that. You can also follow me over on my socials, mainly Instagram's where I hang out, and I'd love to see you over there, have conversations like this and more. All right, let's dive in. So it's very interesting because no matter where you turn, there is constantly conflict. There's constantly disagreement. There are arguments that people get into, and we live in 2024. This is right before the election season is gearing up, and every time the big election comes, the contention between neighbors is worse and worse. And I think that is, in one sense, by design, but also doesn't have to be the final say. But being a peacemaker is not just meant for the political realm. It's not even just meant for dealing with your relationship with your spouse or with your kids or whoever. But really, being a peacemaker is a way of life. It's how to live in harmony with other humans as much as depends on you. That's what the Bible says. And in order for us to be a peacemaker, we have to know how to work through conflict without it being destructive. And that's why today we're going to cover the last part of being a peacemaker, which is a peacemaker is committed to grace. Now, grace is this misunderstood term that we're going to talk about today. And when people talk about grace, they say, oh, well, I'm just going to give myself grace. I'm just going to give them grace. And what they're really saying is, I'm going to continue to allow bad behavior to happen in the name of being kind and being polite. But that's not actually what grace is. Grace brings life. It empowers us to live worthy and not petty lives, to not sweep things under the rug, but actually confront what is hard in order for beautiful things to occur. So if you have not experienced grace yourself, it's a little difficult to try to explain, but I'm going to do my best. And it's important that if you want to be a peacemaker in life, you have to experience grace. You have to experience the goodness and kindness of God. Very simply, grace is God's unearned favor. You and I did not do anything to be God's favorites. We did not do anything for Him to give us special access. We did not do anything except receive the kindness and goodness of God in our lives. And when you and I have received the kindness and goodness of God, it reminds us of where we were, but also where we're going. Now, how does this actually translate to the angry person in front of me, to the person that I just want to knock out some days? It translates in this way, where we remember the grace of God. It says in Ephesians 2:8, God saved you by His grace when you believed, and you cannot take credit for this. It is a gift from God. When we remember how much we have been freely forgiven. Now, if you don't know your own need for forgiveness, if you have not seen your need to be reconciled to God, then yeah, it's not going to make sense why I'm going to want to try to reconcile other people to each other. But when you have seen your need for forgiveness and you have seen your need for reconciliation, it then allows you to see that other person the way that you used to be. Or maybe you're not as extreme as that person, but it gives you, it empowers you, grace empowers you to see that person as created in the image of God. And that is a really important thing to understand, because what happens with conflict and everyday disagreements is we tend to now see this person as our enemy. And for sure, they have probably done things to cause us to view them that way. But grace gives you a different perspective. Grace empowers you. It doesn't enable, it empowers you to see them the way that God sees them, and gives you the strength to be able to respond according to that perspective. Because you and I can see, okay, all right, they're made in the image of God, but like I still want to beat them up. But grace actually empowers you and says, no, because I see them as made in the image of God, because I see them the way that God designed, I'm not going to respond the way that I want to respond. I'm going to respond with goodness and kindness and dignity. And that's not to say that it isn't difficult, especially if the other person is a Christian. They're like, why are you acting like a fool? Because God saved you. You should know better. And there is a higher standard for Christians. But grace is not boxing in what God can do in someone's life. It's understanding that person's pattern and knowing that God can change anyone. Being a peacemaker reminds me of Proverbs chapter 8. Proverbs chapter 8 is all about the personification of wisdom, where she comes out and she is impeaching, she is imploring, she is begging in a way that does not enable or excuse bad behavior, but that calls out the fool and says, I have something better for you. Come and receive. So, what is grace? What does it mean to be a peacemaker who is filled with grace? Well, we'll go through this. So, the first thing to understand is grace seeks to win people over. Grace is strong and clear, but it's not unkind. James talks about how hard it is to tame the tongue in James chapter 3, where we curse men and praise God. And taming the tongue is a really difficult task. But if we don't get a grip on our tone and the words that we use, then we're going to set ablaze people that don't need to be caught on fire. Remember, we are called to be peacemakers. Why? Because we will be called the children of God. In talking about tone, Proverbs chapter 15 verse 1 says this: a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words makes tempers flare. How we use our words is just as important as what words we use. Now, if you are someone who is constantly accused of having a tone because people don't like what you say, I'm with you on that. I definitely can get really spicy and I get fired up when I'm saying things. And it's just difficult because you're not trying to bash people over the head, but you are trying to get the point across very clearly and say, listen, you need to wake up. When someone is yelling fire, you're not going to get mad at them because they're like, fire, fire, fire. You didn't say it nice enough, so now I can't do what you said. No, they're going to say, why didn't you yell louder? Why didn't you make it clearer to me? I didn't realize I was in danger. And when we are confusing tone versus intent, it can be a little bit messy. So I want to work through that, because if you're someone who's like me, who does struggle with your tone and struggling to be too harsh, I understand that, especially in this day and age when everyone accuses you of saying the wrong thing or saying it in the wrong way. And then your knee-jerk reaction is, well, if I'm just going to say it the wrong way anyways, then it doesn't matter how I say it. It doesn't matter what way that I come across. It doesn't matter how these people receive me. And in one sense, that's true, but unfortunately, that type of perspective leads to the other extreme of being name-calling, belittling, condescending. And that is not what God calls us to be. So tone is really important, because we have to make sure that we're not swaying so soft that people cannot hear what you are trying to say, or so loud that they can't see where you're trying to point. I know, it's difficult. It's a fine line to walk, but that is where we have the Holy Spirit to empower us. So we're not alone in that. I love this particular saying because I think that it really gives a clear picture of what it means to be a grace-filled person. And the saying is this: truth without compassion is brutality, and kindness without honesty is manipulation. And that's why I love reading wisdom in Proverbs chapter 8, because she is both kind and clear. She is very direct. She calls a spade, but she does that so that other people might live, that other people might come and receive the freedom that God has and not continue to live a foolish life. If we're more worried about stepping on people's toes, then we're people pleasing. And if we don't care about their toes at all, then we're only pleasing ourselves. The narrow road of following Jesus is learning how to live a life where you are able to be who God has called you to be and say the things that God has called you to say with kindness and with truth. You can't have one or the other. You must have both. Now, for those that feel a little bit like, well, it doesn't matter, like the truth needs to be defended. I can't just worry about stepping on someone's toes. Like if I do that, then the truth's not going to come out. To them, I'm going to tell you this. This is from St. Augustine, and he says, the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose and it will defend itself. It's really important that we operate from truth. And I think people that respond harshly, myself included, tend to feel insecure in the truth, because someone who's secure in truth does not feel the need to shout and convey and demand, but it does compel. Let truth do the work. Let truth be the one that finally has the say. We don't have to hype it up or soften it for people. We can say it in a way that compels them to want to listen. Don't be afraid to get messy. Grace does not compromise, but it's not afraid to get in the weeds with people and work through the message so that way they might receive life. Second thing is, you need to get the whole picture when it comes to grace. When it comes to being a peacemaker, there are two sides to every story, and Grace remembers that. Grace understands that there are missing pieces. We don't have to pick a side right away. We don't have to go one direction or another in that moment. Rather, we can wait and take our time. There's wisdom in that. There's understanding in that. It's okay to wait to gather all of the facts. The third thing to remember is grace seeks to understand. Grace seeks to remember that there are different perspectives. And just because someone arrives to that perspective doesn't mean you have to agree with them. But how can you work through that conversation, and how can you seek to win them over if you're not even willing to see how they got there in the first place? You remember the book I told you about, Surrounding by Idiots? It's a really fascinating book, but I love how it tells you how different personalities arrive to different conclusions because we think differently about situations. Now, for example, like I'm a really direct, straight to the point person. Like I value efficiency. If there is a fast and efficient way to do it, I am on it. Let's go. My husband, not so much. He values more of making sure things are done the right way. And sometimes that means that it will take 30 years for it to get done. I'm just exaggerating. But when him and I are coming into a disagreement, we have to figure out, what are we valuing here? You want to go this route and I want to go this route, but what does it actually need? What does the situation actually call for? And if I don't understand his perspective or he doesn't understand mine, then we're not able to work together in that. So it's so important for you to seek to understand how someone arrives to the conclusions that they arrive to. And then finally, the last part of being a peacemaker who's filled with grace is responding with wisdom. It's taking that time to understand the big picture, understanding the different perspectives, and then speaking wisdom to that situation. And wisdom is just knowledge applied. It's having the knowledge, it's having the understanding and saying, okay, well, how are we going to apply this in this perspective, in this situation? Wisdom doesn't use combative language. It doesn't call people names. It doesn't talk down to them. It isn't proud. It's not self-righteous. It also doesn't shy away from the truth. It doesn't shy away from telling people things to how they really are. But wisdom is clear and honest. And ultimately, it seeks to restore if possible. That's the point of grace. Is grace empowers you to live a life that seeks to restore, that seeks to rebuild. And that's very, very difficult to do if you don't remember how much grace you've been given. If you don't remember the kindness of God, if you don't remember the love of God in your own life, you're going to have a big challenge when it comes to giving grace to other people. So whether it's a minor disagreement or a full-blown falling out, grace is willing to go to battle to say, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight for this because I know what God has given me, and I know that He is willing to offer that to you. Being a peacemaker is not an easy task. It is willing to die to self. It's willing to die to your own ambitions. It's willing to be misunderstood. It's willing to stand in the gap. And it's willing to build bridges, not tear them down. That is really hard to do in our cancel culture world. It is not always rewarding, but it is what is necessary. When you follow Jesus, He's going to require that of us. And the truth of the matter is, when you live your life as a peacemaker, you can live your life knowing that you have done all that you can, all that's dependent on you, to love other people, to give them opportunities, and to let God deal with the rest. It takes out that sense of vengeance, that desire for control. When you remember that the only thing that is your job is to present to them the opportunity. You can't make a horse come to water, but you can bring the water there. You can give the opportunities when needed. You can operate in wisdom and in grace, that other people might also be restored to God and to each other. Don't do the work for the other person, but keep your heart soft and keep it open. Stay humble and wise, and hopefully you too, through your actions of being a peacemaker, will be called a child of God. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am glad that you were with me in this series. Let me know what you think. Was this what you expected? Do you have follow-up questions that you want answered? And don't forget to sign up for my email list. I've got something really fun coming your way. So I don't want you to miss out on that. And I will catch you in the next episode.